Hi everyone, welcome back to another week of counseling and virtual care. Here we go again. We're still looking at basic counseling skills. We're still trying to help you guys build the foundational ideas of what counseling skills look like. So far we've been talking about the differences between counseling and psychotherapy. Then we also started to look a little bit about active listening. So hopefully all of that is giving you a sense of what we mean by basic counseling skills, but it's not only about actively listening, but also about being able to show our clients that we are understanding what they're saying. And one of the big things for us to do in terms of showing our clients that we're understanding where they're coming from is active listening. Another thing is being able to reflect on what they say to us. Because we are asking our clients to put in a vulnerable position where they start opening up and explore their issues. But we need to show that we are actually getting what they're saying. And again, one way to do this is to reflect on the content and the emotions that they are sharing with us. So you saw I just used reflection of content and emotions, two different things. In this video, we'll be seeing how these two are different. How can we actually show effective reflection of content and emotion? What are the impacts of doing that? And we'll also be talking about something called paraphrasing, which is pretty much not parroting, but trying to find our own way and our own words to try and reflect to the client that we are actually actively listening. So that's what we'll be covering in this weekly video lecture. Hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully you get out of it. Hopefully you are also having a chance to go to the tutorials where we'll be giving you guys lots of exercises to practice these reflective or basic counseling skills in terms of reflection and these things that we're talking about. So here we go. Hopefully you enjoy this week's content. All right, let's get into it. In this video, we'll focus on reflection of feelings, reflection of content, and paraphrasing. These, again, are foundational counseling skills that you will very likely need to apply in almost any counseling and perhaps non-counseling settings as well. Once more, remember that you will not be a trained counselor after this course, and you should not provide counseling services. In previous videos, we mentioned that the primary function of a counselor is to deliberately listen so that the client feels that they are being heard and they're understood, and they're confident about that they're being heard and understood by the counselor. However, actively listening to a client by showing all the skills we talked about in previous videos, such as open posture, eye contact, the use of voice, matching nonverbal behavior, and minimal responses, is not enough. Specifically, the counselor needs to respond more actively and draw out the really important details of what the client is saying. We call this reflecting. I like to think about a mirror when I think about reflection in counseling context. And this is because the counselor reflects back what we say or do, and it's almost like looking at yourself in the mirror. We often don't see or hear ourselves, but others do. And because we don't see ourselves, many things we say or do may look different from what we imagine them to be. For example, we may think we're funny, but others may find us odd. Or maybe we think we're generous, but others see us stingy. Again, the idea is that we tend to have blind spots because there are parts of our being and acting that are outside of our conscious awareness. And in this context, a blind spot is something we don't realize we're doing. Now, I wanted to show you an example of someone having a big blind spot. I chose another video from The Office because I love this show, and one of the main characters is named Michael Scott. He's the boss of The Office, and in my opinion, he has a pretty big blind spot. So I'll show you, I think a 1 or 2 minute clip from one of the TV shows, one of the episodes, and I will give you a few thoughts after we watch this clip. So here we go.
Have you felt the vibe yet? We work hard, we play hard. Sometimes we play hard when we should be working hard, right? I guess the atmosphere that I've created here is that I'm a friend first and a boss second. Probably an entertainer third. Just a second, right? Oh, hey, do you like the Jamie Kennedy experiment? Yeah. And punked and all that kind of stuff. Okay. You were gonna be my accomplice. Just go along with it, okay? All right. Just follow my lead. Don't pimp me, all right? Come in. So, corporate just said that I don't want to. Oh, thank you, sure. Pam. Pam, can you come in here for a sec? Just have a seat. I was gonna call you in anyway. You know Ryan. As you know, there's going to be downsizing, and you have made my life so much easier in that I am going to have to let you go first.
What? Why?
Why? Well, theft and stealing.
Stealing?
Mm-hmm.
What am I supposed to have stolen?
Post-it notes.
Post-it notes?
Yeah, God.
What are those worth, like 50 cents?
50 cents, yeah. You steal 1,000 Post-it notes at 50 cents a piece, and, you know, you've made a profit margin. You know, gonna run us out of business, Pam.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I can't believe this. I mean, I've never even stolen as much as a paperclip, and now you're firing me.
And the best thing about it is that we're not gonna have to give you any severance pay. Because that is gross misconduct, and so just clean out your desk. I'm sorry. You've an ex-punk! Surprise! It's a joke! We were joking around! See? Okay, he was in on it. He was my accomplice. And there was just kind of a morale booster thing. And we were showing the new guy around, kind of giving him the feel of the place. So, we totally got you.
You're a jerk!
I don't know about that.
So there you have it. That's Michael Scott for you. Of course, he's the one that does most of the talking. The other guy is just a temp. And you can see how he makes the temp feel quite uncomfortable. And also to Pam, the one that is being fake fired. So you can see what I was talking about in terms of sometimes we think something is funny to us, but it may not be as funny to others. So we operate under these blind spots and things that perhaps are outside of our conscious awareness, things that we may do, we don't realize we do. And that's the beauty of counseling, because you are being yourself, you are being free to talk uninterruptedly when someone is actively listening to you and at some stages starts to reflect back on certain things that you perhaps may not be aware of. And that's one of the beauty of these therapeutic relationships and therapeutic context. So, going back to this idea of reflection, we can say that there are basically two types of reflection. We can talk about reflection of content and reflection of feelings. In reflection of content, the counselor paraphrases or reflects back to the client what the client has said to the counselor. But, and this is important, the counselor does not repeat word for word what the client has said. If the counselor repeats word for word, it will probably be a bit annoying for the client. Instead, the counselor picks out the most important content of what the client has said and re-expresses it in the counselor's own words. Here's an example of reflection of content. Here we go. First example. The client may say, "I'm fighting with my daughter. My husband is not speaking to me. At work, the boss keeps speaking on me. And what's more, my best friend doesn't seem to understand me anymore." To which the counselor could respond, "You seem to be having some relationship problems." In this example, we see how the client talks about the relationship problems in detail. And that's exactly what the counselor focuses on. By doing this, we would expect the client to internalize and reflect that they are in fact having relationship problems with multiple people or on multiple fronts. Sometimes people tend to blame others for the problems, and that might be maybe the case with this client. But once a counselor reflects back that the client is having problems with many people, then maybe the client may look inwards to see that what they can do to get to a better place and start perhaps thinking if they're doing something that maybe is causing them to have relationship problems with several people. Here's another example. The client may say, "Yesterday I rushed around. I seemed to have no time to myself. I went from one place to another, and it was really hard to fit everything in." The counselor could respond, "You had a very full day yesterday." Once more, we see how the counselor captures the essence of what the client is saying and reflects that back to the client to show that they're listening and understanding of what is being said. But again, you can see how the counselor is not repeating word for word, it's just focusing exclusively on a few details or the most salient details. Now, these examples are extracted from 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 and 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 chapter 5. I will put a link on Canvas so you can access the book. I 100% strongly recommend reading this chapter and a few other chapters that we'll be talking about because they have many more examples to what I just put here. So here you got 2, in the book you got like 10. And they also include longer transcripts of conversations between clients and counselor to illustrate the use of minimal responses and reflection of content. And this will give you a better idea of what we mean by reflection of content. And it will also allow you to practice as much as possible in terms of seeing how this type of dialogues will unfold between the counselor and the client. All right, let's keep talking about reflection of content. So when the counselor effectively reflects on what the client has said, the client will say something like, "Yes, that's exactly what happened," or "Correct, that's what I was saying." So if the counselor uses the words to reflect on what has been said, the client will agree and will likely continue because they will feel heard and encouraged to talk more about it. But if the counselor reflects on the wrong content or says something that the client didn't say, the client will likely correct the counselor and say something like, "Well, that's not really what I said." Ideally, we want to reflect on the right content. But if we're not sure we're on the right track, we can say so, and clients will likely respond well to this. Let's think about for a minute. The first example we used a few slides back, where the client said they were having problems with many people. If you're unsure about what to reflect on, you could reflect in the form of almost like asking for a clarification. Let's suppose the counselor here thought the relationship problems were only with the client's brother. The counselor would have said something like, "I'm not sure I understood this, but it sounds like you're having problems with your brother." To which the client will likely say, "Well, not really, that's not really what I said," and then probably clarify what they actually said. Again, this is not bad practice, but it's not ideal. It can be perceived as being honest and transparent, and at the end of the day, we can make mistakes too, and we can show, by doing this, we can show that we are actually trying to do our best to pay attention. But you probably want to be paying good attention to what the client is saying, because if you reflect on the wrong content several times, your client will likely start wondering if you're actually paying attention, and perhaps it may disrupt the therapeutic process. Another example of not using this reflection technique appropriately is parroting. Now, parroting is when the counselor repeats word for word what the client has said. Occasionally, it can be useful to repeat exactly what the client has said to emphasize the importance of what has been said. But paraphrasing can be much more effective than parroting. So what's the difference between parroting and paraphrasing? Well, like we just mentioned, parroting is repeating word for word what the client has said. Alternatively, paraphrasing involves capturing the essence of what has been said, but using our own words or the counselor's words to reflect this content. Let's look at an example of paraphrasing, what paraphrasing could look like. Let's imagine the client says, "I feel like I can't relate to people. I'm always distant and lonely." Parroting in this case would be if the counselor said, "You feel like you can't relate to people, you're always distant and lonely." Again, using what the client said word for word. Now, using the same example, paraphrasing would be something like, "It sounds like you're having emotionally distance from those around you." Or, "It sounds like you're emotionally distant from those around you." In both paraphrasing and parroting, there is a reflection of content. However, when counselors paraphrase, the clients will likely feel there is a natural flow in the conversation. But if counselors are parroting all the time, maybe you can get away with doing it once, doing it twice. But then at some stage, the client will start thinking, "Is this guy actually mocking me? Is he paying attention?" So you can see how it's something you don't want to get in the habit of doing. Here's another example of paraphrasing. The client could say something like, "Within a week, I had a rates notice, an electricity bill, my car broke down, and I spent a lot of money having it fixed. There was a big dinner I had to attend to as part of my work, and it was very expensive. And in addition, I had to fork out money for my son's trip overseas and my daughter's school fees." To which the counselor may respond, "You've had a lot of expenses to meet in a very short time." So again, we can see how the counselor is capturing the essence of what the client said in just a few words and reflecting it back to the client. Here's another example. The client says, "My daughter is a very attractive girl. She is good looking and vivacious. She dresses very nicely and she is a good-natured person. She often smiles and seems to be very happy." To which the counselor could reply, "Your daughter has many positive qualities." Once more, the counselor provides a short statement reflecting or capturing the essence of what the client has said. Alright, so far we've been talking mainly about reflection of content. Let's now move on to reflection of feelings. Just like reflection of content, reflection of feelings is a way of showing your client that you are listening to them and that you understand what they're saying. However, the difference is that reflection of content focuses on the content of what the client said, and reflection of feelings focuses on the emotional feelings the client is conveying. But to identify and reflect clients' feelings, we need to differentiate between feelings and thoughts. Now, thoughts are at a head level and feelings are at a gut level. Thoughts are continuously running around in our brains and feelings are linked to our bodily sensations. For example, someone may worry about the bills they have to pay, but these are thoughts. Feelings related to worrying about the bills would be the tension they feel on their shoulders, having an upset stomach, having shortness of breath, or sweaty palms. In this case, the feeling relating to worrying about paying the bills would be tension, being anxious, or worrying. Now, you need to keep in mind that in English, people often use the word feel referring to their thoughts, and that can be quite confusing, particularly for beginner counselors. For example, if someone says, "I feel lost," it may sound like they are expressing a feeling, but it's a thought. And in fact, they would be expressing a feeling, which is confusion. So you see how it can be a little bit tricky to identify whether someone is expressing a thought versus a feeling. But if the client says, "I feel that life can be unfair for those with a disadvantaged background," they're actually expressing a thought about how some people can have it easy and some have it hard depending on where they come from. Perhaps a good way to differentiate between thoughts and feelings is that people will often use one word to describe their feelings and more words to describe their thoughts, despite them saying "I feel." So looking at the example we just used, feeling lost expresses confusion and is using pretty much one word, and thinking that life can be unfair takes many more words to express that. Now, many times clients will try to avoid acknowledging their feelings because it can be a bit overwhelming to do so. For example, clients may try to rationalize their pain and almost talk about it as if it was something else or someone else's pain, something separate from themselves, or something that didn't belong within their bodies. And they may do this because it is less painful to talk about it in this way. So rather than saying, "I am depressed," a client may talk about how difficult it is to find motivation to see their friends and family. But the problem is that when clients avoid talking about their feelings, their bodily sensations and somatic symptoms, they just don't own them. And if they don't own them, the clients are more likely to go round and round in circles and not make any progress or make very little progress during sessions. However, if clients talk about their feelings and own them, it is much more likely that they will make progress during sessions. Now, it can be tempting for new counselors to help clients avoid experiencing their feelings. And this makes sense because we're usually taught to avoid dealing with painful experiences. For example, people often comfort other people by saying, "Don't cry, it'll be alright, you'll get over it." But the reality is that in counseling, we want our clients to be in touch with the feelings and fully embrace the pain or sadness or anxiety they are experiencing. Because when clients experience their emotions, they will likely gain emotional release, emotional understanding, and will likely be able to make progress. Owning one's feeling is called catharsis. Now, catharsis comes from the ancient Greek word katharsis, same way but just spelled with a K. And it means purification or cleansing. Greek philosophers like Plato or Aristotle believe catharsis was a process needed to attain knowledge. And if we think about catharsis in the counseling context, acknowledging one's feelings or having a cathartic experience can lead to emotional knowledge or understanding of one's emotional state. So again, getting in touch with our feelings will probably help us gain emotional understanding of what is happening for us. And you can imagine how the same thing could be said for clients. If they are, again, to this idea, bringing you back to the the first part of the video where we're talking about blind spots, and I show you the video of Michael Scott. So if we think about how for Michael Scott, he was not aware of so many things, the same thing could be said about clients. If we help our clients get in touch, reach out and sit with the feeling, be comfortable with what they're experiencing, we could probably help them gain emotional intelligence, understand what's happening for them, name it, own it, and perhaps move on and deal with it. So how do we help our clients be in touch with their feelings and emotions? Once more, by doing reflection of feelings. Once more, the idea is to capture and reflect the feeling the client is conveying. For example, if someone is talking about being sad, you could say, "You are sad," or "You are feeling sad." This can sound a bit too simplistic, but it can be a really powerful technique because the client will be faced with their own feelings and these will become apparent to the client, whereas before they might have been outside of their conscious awareness. Here's an example of what reflection of feeling could actually look like. Let's imagine the client says, I keep expecting my mother to show more interest in me. Time and again, I've asked her to come over to see me, but she never does. I just don't think she cares about me at all. To which the counselor could respond, you feel hurt. So we can see how here the counselor is being very short, very concise, very precise, because it's capturing that the client is feeling hurt. It's not looking at all of the content, it's just isolating the emotion. And you see how that can be really powerful because the client suddenly is confronted with this idea that they're feeling hurt, that yes, maybe they're rationalizing what is happening for mom or whatever, maybe making excuses, but suddenly the client has to deal with the fact that they say they're feeling hurt. Here's another example. The client may say, young people nowadays aren't like they used to be in my day. Now they're dirty, rude, and disrespectful. I don't know what has become of the new generation. To which the counselor could reply, you are disappointed in the new generation. So again, you see how the counselor is mainly emphasizing the idea that the client is saying they're disappointed. Now at times, it could be that counselors are quite sure that someone is feeling a certain way. For example, if someone says, I am feeling really frustrated with my partner because she doesn't listen to what I have to say, the counselor will be very certain that the client is feeling frustrated. But sometimes the feelings being conveyed are not entirely clear to the counselor, and the reflection of feelings could take a bit more of a cautious approach. Here are a few examples of how the counselor could clarify whether the client is conveying frustration. For example, they could say, I wonder if you're feeling frustrated, or if that happened to me, I would probably feel frustrated. This would encourage the client to get in touch with their frustration and explore in depth why they're feeling that way, or even if in fact they are feeling that way at all. It's also important to know the right words to describe what we are feeling. Or, as counselors, be able to help our clients understand what they are feeling by identifying the right words to describe what is happening to them right now. Here we have a list of feelings extracted once more from 𝓃𝒄𝑜'𝓈. And what I like about this list is that we have mild, medium, and strong feelings. For example, we could be feeling a little curious, which is not necessarily a negative feeling, but if our curiosity escalates, we may feel we are suspicious, and if it keeps escalating, we may feel paranoid. So you can see how it's along the same lines, but the strength of the feeling says a lot about how we are feeling. And the same thing could be said about our clients. For example, let's look at the bottom row. If someone says they are feeling unhappy, perhaps feeling unhappy is not a nice feeling to experience, but it's not as bad as feeling miserable or feeling distraught. And it's very important for us counselors to be able to accurately capture what the client is conveying to us, and perhaps again knowing, having in our toolkit all these different words to identify correctly the strength of the feeling they're conveying. It can help the cathartic process. Keep in mind that the list in 𝓃𝒄𝑜'𝓈, again this is extracted from the book, the list they offered is much longer and this is only a snippet. So it's definitely worth checking out their book. I remember when I was going through this process as a student, I used to be super eager trying to collect as much information as possible, And maybe this could be the starting of your portfolio. Maybe you can print that sheet with all the adjectives, all the words to describe the feelings. And maybe that's, something you can carry with you for your clinical practice. Now, so far we talked about reflection of content or reflection of feelings as two separate things. But the reality is that more often than not, clients will talk about content and emotions all jumbled together. That means that counselors will have to reflect both content and emotions. For example, the phrase, "You feel disappointed because your brother didn't do as he promised," includes both emotion and content. So looking at this example, the client here is saying that he's disappointed, and that's a feeling, but he's also saying that his brother didn't do as expected or promised. So that's the content. So we can see how these two micro counseling skills can be combined. Now let's look at a few examples of how reflection of content and feeling can be combined as well. Let's look at the first one. The client will say, "My brother broke my electric drill. He didn't bother to tell me that he had broken it. He just left it lying there. Then he borrowed my motorbike without telling me. I feel like thumping him." The counselor could reply, "You're angry with your brother because he doesn't respect your possessions." So you can see how the counselor here is capturing anger. So he's saying you're angry with your brother. But he's also saying why he's angry with the brother. And that's because the brother doesn't respect the client's possessions. So you can see how there's feeling and content. Let's look at another example. The client says, "I've got a new job recently. It's quite different from the old one. The boss is nice to me. I've got a good office to work in, and the whole atmosphere in the firm is really positive. I can't believe that I'm so lucky." And the counselor could respond, "You feel really happy with your new job." Again, the counselor is identifying happiness, you feel really happy, but also why or where is this happiness coming from. The client is happy because of the new job. So again, feeling and content. Now, once more, remember that these examples are extracted from 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈 and 𝓃𝒶𝑜'𝓈. These examples are coming from chapter 7 from the book. If you want to see more examples of reflection of content and feeling combined, you can definitely look at chapter 7. I'll 100% recommend that. As we mentioned before, it is good for counselors to keep responses on the short side to minimize disruption to the client's thought process. The problem with using long statements is that the counselor may take the client away from their world and bring them into the counselor's world or way of seeing things. So sometimes, trying to keep our statements short, we need to decide whether we reflect both feeling and content or reflect on only one of these. Now, reflection of content is great because it tells the client that they're being heard. But reflection of feeling can be really powerful because the client becomes suddenly confronted with the feelings they are expressing. Here are a few suggestions when thinking about whether we want to reflect the client's feelings or content. Now, when reflecting content, we can use phrases such as, "I've heard you say," "What I've heard you say is," "I get the impression that," "I'm getting the idea that." You can see all of these phrases are looking at capturing the content of what is being said. And when reflecting feelings, we can use phrases such as, "If I'm hearing you correctly, you are feeling this way or that way." "I'm sensing that you feel X, Y, and Z." Or, "I get the impression that you feel this way, that way." You probably want to practice these suggestions, but make sure you incorporate your own style. So these are pretty much like standards, responses. But you will want to adjust these to the way you talk or the way you express yourself. Otherwise, it may sound a little bit too mechanistic and may not be as effective as a technique. And with that, we conclude this video. Now, I once more strongly suggest to check out the links to the books we've been talking about. We will also put those links on the tutorial section on Canvas. So hopefully you find this content very useful. Practice as much as you can, and I'll see you in the next video.